Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Please do actually let us know in the chat. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Melanie Tuffin, and I'm the IPRRG Secretary. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to our third webinar today. So we've been holding these webinars to replace our annual meeting, which has been postponed due to COVID. So today we have three speakers who'll be talking to us about the International Plant Sentinel Network, or IPSN for short. First up, we have Katherine O'Donnell from Botanic Gardens Conservation International, the IPSN coordinator. And also joining us will be Chris Malumphy and Charles Lane from Fera Science Limited, who will also talk about the work that they have done with the IPSN. So please do be patient with us as we'll be swapping presenters as we go through. Remember, you can ask questions using the Q&A function, and we'll put as many of these to our speakers at the end as we can, time allowing. So Katherine, if you'd like to start sharing your presentation and take it away.
Unmute Katherine.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks for inviting us today to talk to you about the IPSN. So I am head of seed conservation and plant health at BGCI, and I coordinate the IPSN. So just to give you a bit of background about BGCI. So we're a network organization, worldwide network organization for Botanic Gardens. We were established in 1987, so have been running for over 30 years. We have our headquarters at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew in the UK, and we also have offices in the US, in Kenya, Singapore, and China. So our mission is to mobilize botanic gardens and engage partners in securing plant diversity for the well-being of people and the planet. So we have about 600 odd botanic gardens that are members of our network. And we believe that their experience, their skills, their facilities and their collections combine to make them the world's greatest force for plant conservation. So we have various programs at BGCI related to plant conservation, including red listing, seed conservation, ecological restoration, and plant health and biosecurity, which is where the IPSN, or the International Plant Sentinel Network, sits. So I'm sure you are all aware that invasive alien plant pests and pathogens pose a considerable threat to plant health worldwide, and an increase in globalization of trade in plants and also plant material, in addition to the effects of climate change, means that this threat is only likely to continue to rise in the future. Identifying the pests and pathogens that are most likely to pose future threats is crucial, but also obviously very challenging. In recent years, there's been a sharp increase in the number of these harmful organisms, which are causing real large-scale environmental and economic damage. So Xylella fastidiosa, for example, could lose $22 billion to Southern Europe in fighting the bacterium. And this was in the paper just last year. In the UK, the National Trust was planning to fell about 40,000 trees due to ash dieback. And ash dieback, interestingly, so Fraxinus excelsior ash is a really common and widespread plant, but actually we at BGCI have recently listed it as near threatened on the IUCN Red List, due in part to the real impact that pests and diseases are having on the populations of these species in the wild. So a significant issue in managing plant health is really predicting which organisms are going to pose a future threat, the current unknowns, and prevention is arguably the most effective way to manage these organisms, but obviously regulation relies on a list of known pests and diseases. And this is where sentinel plants come in. So sentinel plants are those that are growing outside of their native range, that can be monitored for damage by pests and pathogens that they wouldn't otherwise encounter. This provides us with really good information on the risks that these organisms could pose if introduced into the plant's native range, therefore providing an early warning of threats. So, for example, monitoring UK tree species in Australian Botanic Gardens. Monitoring these plant sentinels can build knowledge and understanding of the pest-host relationships and also support the development of management plans and also risk assessments. And we believe that Botanic Gardens and arboreta are a unique and underutilised resource that can support this sentinel research. So some of the advantages of utilising Botanic Gardens for this type of work is that there are over 3,000 botanic gardens in the world, and they have a wide geographical distribution. And together they house about 1/3 of all known plant species. And many of these plants are non-native in the country that they're growing, so therefore are potential sentinels. So the staff in Botanic Gardens are really knowledgeable and have a huge wealth of expertise and experience on the collections that they look after. So we were talking to some staff at a botanic garden in New Zealand recently, and they have this avenue of beech trees, and the beech trees are looking unhealthy. There's something wrong with them. The botanic garden staff aren't plant health experts. They don't necessarily know what's wrong, but they know that something isn't right. All these elements together, all these advantages mean that botanic gardens are in a unique position to help detect potential invasive threats and present a significant opportunity to understand and predict when and where species might become invasive pests. So just looking again at this map of botanic gardens around the world, take somewhere like Kew Gardens, which is just one point on this map in the south of the UK, and it has over 50,000 plant species from throughout the world, many of these non-natives. And that's just one point on this map, so extrapolate that out to the other points on this map, and you get an idea of the huge potential that there is within botanic garden collections for identifying unusual pest activities on non-native plants and reporting this information back to the country of origin. So just as a case study example, emerald ash borer, which I'm sure you're all aware of, native to Asia where it isn't a problem. It was introduced into the US in the 1990s and has since caused damage and death to hundreds of millions of ash trees. It's more recently been recorded in Russia and also in the Ukraine, and there's a real worry that if it does spread into Europe, it could have real devastating impacts on the European ash populations, which are already under stress due to ash dieback. So if we had, for example, been monitoring the impact of the pest on US ash species in botanic gardens in China, we might have been forewarned of the danger and better equipped to actually deal with it. So this is where the IPSN comes in and could have helped. So the International Plant Sentinel Network is a global network of botanic gardens, arboreta, plant health institutes, national plant protection organisations. And they all work together to provide an early warning system for new and emerging pest and pathogen threats. So we have a network of about, we have formal members within our network, and there's 66 gardens that are part of the network, so formally part of the network in about 20 countries, and they all collaborate together to share information and improve knowledge on plant health. But we also have many other gardens that get involved in specific surveys related to the collections in their gardens. And any garden that's interested is able to become part of the network. So I'm just going to share a video now just from one of our partners talking about being part of the network and why it's useful for them.
Our plants are really important in New Zealand. We have a unique flora here. Being part of the network has really strengthened our relationship across the globe. Being a botanic garden, we're like an international club. And it means that we can really network and use other gardens as a resource to provide information to each other. For example, a lot of gardens across the world have New Zealand plants, and they also have pests and diseases that we don't have in New Zealand. So they can observe what our plants are doing under those conditions and those new pathogens, and we can learn from them what might happen if that came to New Zealand.
So one of the overarching aims of the IPSN is really to build capacity of Botanic Garden staff in plant health. And one of the things that we've done related to that is create this plant health checker. So basically it's a survey form for managing the plant health within collections. So it's a traffic light system, so red for bad, orange for getting there, and green for okay. And so gardens can actually utilize this to record their plant health of their collections within their gardens. And it's actually proved really useful within the network. A lot of the gardens use it, especially where there's limited diagnostic capability, because it's really useful to be able to record information on this to share with diagnosticians. It's been translated into various languages and modified by different gardens for their personal use. So we also have this reference guides that go along with this on kind of the symptoms that gardens might come across and how to actually describe them. We create these posters with information on pest and disease issues. So these are both for trees in the UK, so for European ash and English oak, and they have information on the pest and disease issues that Botanic Gardens should be looking out for within their collections. So really raising awareness of pest and disease issues that we're already aware about. And these can be put up in Botanic Gardens staff rooms or actually out into the gardens as public outreach for all of the visitors that visit the Botanic Gardens. So we create these guides just on sort of general biosecurity as well, to build biosecurity awareness within Botanic Gardens, how to take pictures to share with diagnosticians, classification of damage, and just general information about the network. We've run many workshops abroad over the years, really with the aim to build capacity for plant health surveillance and also raise biosecurity awareness among Botanic Gardens in Arboreta. We hold a UK IPSN workshop every year where we raise awareness of new and emerging pest and disease issues in the UK and highlight the IPSN activities. And it provides gardens with an opportunity to raise issues and concerns that they have and bring those up with stakeholders at the meetings. So the workshops provide a really good opportunity for garden representatives to meet and also be trained by diagnosticians. And this can really encourage and strengthen relationships at that national level. We have a project website at plantsentinel.org, and our Twitter handle is at IPSN_BGCI. So within our website, we have a members area for our members, which has a forum, links, and all of our IPSN documents. So it's got a range of materials to aid pest and disease identification, including links and contact information to enable diagnostic support from plant health experts. So really what we wanted to do with this was build on the tools that are already in existence. There's a huge amount of databases available that contain information on plant collections, pests and diseases. And so the aim is really to bring it all into one place so that if you're working in a botanic garden, you can easily access the resources, different types of information. We have 3 databases that we host at BGCI, which really underpin the work that we do on the IPSN. The first is Garden Search. So that has information on the botanic gardens around the world and has over 3,000 gardens within the database. So where the gardens are, what specific collections they focus on, their facilities, their expertise, their research. And then linked to that, we have Plant Search, which is a database of all of those plants in cultivation. So each botanic garden provides a list of the plants in cultivation at their garden. And another database that we use is Global Tree Search. And so Global Tree Search is the most comprehensive database of tree species. It has over 60,000 trees within the database, and you can either search for a tree, a particular species, and it will tell you all the countries that it is native to, or you can search a specific country, so you search the US and it will tell you all the native trees within the US. So this is really useful when we're, say, looking at European oak species, and we can just pull out a list from that. So I just thought I'd spend the next couple of minutes just talking about the recent activities of the IPSN. 2020 was the International Year of Plant Health, and we kicked off the year by producing an issue of BG Journal, which is BGCI's in-house journal on, and we created the issue on botanic gardens and biosecurity. So it has a lot of case studies and articles on plant health from our Botanic Garden members. It's available on the BGCI website to download, so if you're interested in finding out more about botanic gardens and their involvement in biosecurity, I'd really recommend looking it up. So within this year, DEFRA has funded us under the Future Proofing Plant Health Programme for 3 activities. So the first is coordination of the IPSN, the second is a pilot study on general surveillance, and the third is EAB monitoring in Eastern Europe. So within the coordination of the IPSN, we focus on targeted surveys of known pest and disease issues. So say, for example, rosette virus or EAB on ash hosts. And one of our targeted surveys is on oak pests on European oak species. So we've been really lucky in that we've been working with a beetle expert that's based in one of the botanic gardens over in California. And he's actually gone out and surveyed the European oaks within the botanic gardens in California and sort of really determined which of these oak species are having a negative impact on European oaks. So with that information, we're able to say something like the most likely to establish oak pest is Polyphagus shothole borer, because it was found to have significant infection on Quercus robur and suber at various sites that were surveyed. So the other activity that we are doing is general surveillance, and we're done it this year as a pilot study. And this is really the first time that we're running a general surveillance program as opposed to targeted surveys on known pest and disease issues. So what we're really doing is creating and testing the model to determine if it works and how it works. So we've chosen 3 host species that are of interest to the UK, and we're basically surveying every pest and pathogen that affects those species identified. So the host species of interest were chosen as Quercus robur and Patria. We lumped those 2 together because morphologically they're quite similar, Pinus sylvestris and Rosa. So what we've done is we have chosen to carry out the pilot study in Australia and New Zealand. We kept it just to 2 countries as the pilot. Australia and New Zealand were chosen really due to the capacity and capability of the gardens there. They have really good networks related to biosecurity within the gardens, and we have good links in with the Botanic Gardens and also the Plant Health Institutes due to our involvement in fresco projects. So what we did is we identified Botanic Gardens and arboreta that had the host species of interest based on our data from Plant Search and Garden Search, and you can see here these maps are the species and their locations in Botanic Gardens in the 2 countries. So we had the Botanic Gardens survey in spring and summer, the collections that they have of these species. And we recently actually had our final workshop of the project a few weeks ago, and it was really nice to see how engaged and how interested the Botanic Gardens are. So especially at the workshop that we had last week was in New Zealand, and yeah, the New Zealand Botanic Gardens are really keen to be involved if this goes forward, and also they're just really engaged and like to be able to show that their collections have research use. It's really useful within their own countries and within their own institutions to be able to really focus on species, especially that aren't native and maybe don't necessarily get a lot of their attention usually. So another piece of work that we've been doing is on emerald ash borer. So we sit on the UK's preparedness board for emerald ash borer. As I said before, it's been recently found in Russia and more recently in Ukraine. Likely that if it did spread to Europe, it would cause real devastation to our ash population. And recent studies suggest it's actually moving west from Russia at a rate about 25 miles per year. So our aim within the preparedness board is to monitor the spread of EAB across Europe. And what we've done this year is we've created a network. So we've identified all the botanic gardens in Eastern Europe that have ash species in their collections. It's about 45 gardens in about 12 countries. We've created training and capacity building materials, so posters and survey forms that we've had translated into the various languages of the countries that are involved. And in the next few years, what we aim to do is set up the monitoring and trapping plan. So gardens will survey their collections, and we'll also set up traps within the botanic gardens to actually trap for. So I'd just like to thank our funders and our collaborators, Fera, and Ipsn. I'll pass now on to Malumphy, who's going to talk a bit more about the network.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, thank you, Chris.
I'm Chris Malumphy, and I work at Fera Science Limited. And I was very fortunate as I had the opportunity to visit some of the most spectacular botanical gardens in the world, in California and in China and South Africa, and meet some incredible people who are absolutely passionate about biosecurity and conservation. So just to give you a quick outline of my talk, I'm just going to again, just sort of giving it a quick introduction to the work of the IPSN, talk about the regions that were selected for capacity building, tell you about some of the workshops that we delivered in different places, and then just finish off with a couple of the priority pests which were identified through the work of the IPSN. In this picture here, we've got a group of Chinese delegates inspecting a bonsai tree because we found some large holes where longhorn beetles had emerged from the tree. And this is an example of one of the pathways of introduction where these beetle larvae occur inside these bonsai trees, and they get sort of exported from China, and this provides a means of entry of these pests into other parts of the world. Next slide, please. So Katherine's already explained that the globalization and climate change have contributed to an increase in the introduction and spread of plant pests and pathogens. And the IPSN facilitates collaboration amongst institutions globally with a focus on linking Botanic Gardens and Arboreta, the national plant protection organisations and plant health science. The aim is to facilitate these institutions to work together to use expatria plantings, these sentinel plants, to provide an early warning system of new and emerging pests and pathogen risks, but also using impatria plant early detection, collections in the botanical garden to be inspected, to look for the early introductions of certain pests, and if you detect it, increase the probability of a positive outcome, such as eradication and containment. So I was heavily involved with the capacity building. So a key component of the IPSN is to build capacity through training and development of networks. The plant protection services have limited resources in all countries and can therefore benefit from harnessing support from botanical collections and other stakeholders. Many of the alien plant pests introduced into the UK, as an example, are first recorded at botanical collections by their members. And a good example here is we have the Royal Horticultural Society that's had a very large number of members, and many of the new pests are actually found in private gardens. The samples are submitted to the Royal Horticultural Society and they notify the NPPO. Training also increases phytosanitary awareness and biosecurity at botanical collections. But in all of the workshops that I held, one of the main problems was communication, and we really need good lines of communication between the gardens and the plant protection services. In the UK, we have a system called Tree Alert, which is a web-based system where you can upload photographs and details. Any member of the public or anybody can actually notify the PS of plant diseases and pests. Next slide. So countries selected, three countries specifically: California, and this was because of the presence of some major tree threats, particularly to oaks. China was selected because, in fact, the majority of invasive tree pests in Europe have originated in temperate Asia, and many of these have actually been introduced with trade from China. And then South Africa was selected in part because of the presence of large numbers of European tree species that have been planted and also naturalised, and the trees have been there, that the European trees have been present for about a century. So it's like an open-air laboratory. And I should say that we had great support from the country experts, particularly Abby Heard-Meyer in the US, Hui Dong in China, and Trudy Papp in South Africa. So just to give you an outline of the IPRRG workshop in the USA, this was held in 2015 at the Huntington Library in San Marino. It was attended by staff from local gardens, but also significantly they invited staff from Mexico. So we represented a range of speakers from the US. In America, they have their own Sentinel Plant Network. And so we had members from the US Sentinel Plant Network, from the University of California, Riverside, the US Forest Services, and Huntington Gardens. And so we had we discussed a range of pests, but specifically we concentrated on pests on oak, and we saw examples of the prolific shot borer, which is causing tremendous damage in California, killing tens of thousands of trees, and we saw damage and the symptoms and discussed the management of golden spotted oak borer. Next slide, please. So we also ran a workshop in China on the identification and diagnosis of longhorn beetles in China and nearby countries. And we had participants from 17 different institutions, mainly botanical gardens. We also had staff coming in from Singapore, Thailand, and some other countries. So it really was a sort of international affair. It was the delegates were absolutely sort of a passionate, really sort of hard-working, very intensive couple of days. We did some field work looking for symptoms. One of the most useful things was that this was the first time that many of these institutions had actually sort of met, worked together, and also socially, and so we sort of developed all sorts of networks. And they also, this was the start of the first of the meetings where they were going to have an annual meeting where these institutions would get together and discuss biosecurity, share information, and try and develop these relationships. So sometimes it can take an outsider to come in and set up a workshop, and for the Botanic Gardens to see the benefit of this. And as I said, they have had sort of annual meetings ever since this first meeting. The next slide, please. what was truly remarkable, I sent over a series of posters, lectures and some literature, and everything, there was a lot of information. Everything was translated into Chinese in one weekend. It was also, everything was printed out, published in colour. They had sort of remarkable sort of resources. So what you can see at the bottom of the picture, there's I think it was, we had sort of 2 posters and about 4 booklets published in Chinese for the workshops. Some of the pests that we encountered during the sort of field sessions were really spectacular. And certainly one of my favourites is the lantern bug, which you can see at the bottom left-hand side. It's a shame we don't have sort of spectacular pests like that in the UK. The next slide, please. So South Africa was very interesting because many, certainly in the urban areas, many of the plants are European, and so that they've been introduced for nearly a century. So very common trees such as beech and English oak and plane and some of the European pines are very sort of widespread. But also equally important, many South African plants, for example, Agapanthus, Aloe, Clivia, Gerbera, Pelargonium, are widely grown in Europe. And so we can monitor these South African plants and actually look out for potential European pests. You can imagine if they were accidentally introduced into South Africa. Next slide, please. So we held 3 plant pest monitoring and prevention workshops in South Africa in 2017. They were held at the South African National Botanical Institute Gardens in KwaZulu-Natal, Kirstenbosch and Pretoria. And we covered subjects such as the Sentinel Plant Health Checker, an introduction to invertebrate plant pests, invasive non-native plant health threats to South Africa, fungal pathogens such as Phytophthora, and biosecurity best practice. Next slide, please. There were 120 official attendees, plus quite a large number of students. And this was the first time that many of the stakeholders had met to discuss common issues such as pest detection, identification and management. Next slide, please. We also covered Phytophthora and fungal diseases that are killing off the trees. So we did get them to practice stem injection using potassium phosphide. This is not a cure, but it does prolong the life of specimen trees. We also collected a huge range of pests. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to, I should have mentioned that one of the most important things about the workshops in South Africa, the Polyphicus shothole borer had just been identified officially just before the workshops. And the first announcement of this major pest was made at the IPSN workshops. So we had 120 official attendees, plus large numbers of students. So we could actually sort of broadcast the fact that we had this new pest. In fact, this new pest was first found at one of the Botanic Gardens, which shows you that their importance for monitoring their collections. Charles is actually going to talk further about how the IPSN prioritises the pests, but we use something called the UK Plant Health Risk Register that provides a score of well over 1,000 pests and diseases. This helps sort of prioritise research. You can identify the 2 examples, the gold-spotted oak borer and the Polyphicus shothole borer, which is why we had the workshop in California to learn more about these. Because where we've identified evidence gaps and we want to sort of find information to fill these gaps so we have a more robust risk assessment and management plan. This risk register is an ideal way of identifying these gaps in knowledge. Next slide, please. So this spectacular looking insect is the gold-spotted oak borer. It's in the same family as the emerald ash borer, which I think many of us, or certainly in Europe, are much more familiar with. The insect is quite sort of distinct. It's got these lovely golden spots on the wing cases. This isn't a photograph, a life-size photograph. It's a lot smaller. It's only a couple of millimeters long, and in fact, it's rarely seen in the field. Go to the next slide, please. One of the reasons that I wanted to mention this is that this is an example of an insect. This is actually native to Australia, but this insect, it's native to North America. Sorry about that. It's native to one part, Arizona. When it moved into California, it behaves as an exotic invasive species. The same thing happens in Australia and California, where you have very large countries. Some Australian insects from the west, if they're introduced into the east of the country, will act as an invasive country. The gold-spotted oak borer has killed well in excess of 80,000 trees in southern California. It kills oaks, in the actual sort of section of red oaks. And we're concerned whether it can actually attack the white oaks. Go to the next slide, please. It's the larvae that cause the damage. Can I have the next slide, please? I think I'll just move quickly through this because you have the information on the slides. So the larvae feed under the bark, they ring the trees, and they will kill the trees. The spotted oak borer actually kills the trees relatively slowly. It can take sort of several years, unlike the emerald ash borer that can kill the trees very quickly. The next slide, please. And actually, can I go on to the next slide, because I think it's more relevant to Australia. So there is a species group, and there's one beetle in this group called the Prolifica shothole borer. Again, the larvae tunnel into the wood, but it's not the actual beetle that kills the trees, it's the fungus that it vectors. So here's a picture of a London plain, and where the adult beetles have emerged, you get bleed on the tree trunk. The beetle itself is only about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters. Next slide, please. So the Prolifica shothole borer, the nomenclature and the taxonomy is not entirely resolved yet. It's being studied. There's a group of 4 or 5 beetles, and it keeps changing its name, which is a little bit confusing. But it's a vector Fusarium urulacea that causes Fusarium dieback. It attacks well in excess of 200 tree species. It's a major pest in California, where it's killed tens of thousands of trees. As I've mentioned, it was the first public announcement of this beetle in South Africa was at the IPSN workshops. In South Africa, it is killed and is killing hundreds of mature oak trees and London plains. So this is of a potential major concern to us. And we gathered evidence on this. We submitted it to the National Plant Sentinel Organisation and onto the EU, and the EU Plant Health Standing Committee have been discussing the potential regulation for the Prolifica shothole borer. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of the impact. This is a very famous plain of London, this is an avenue of London plane trees planted over 100 years ago in KwaZulu-Natal National Botanic Garden. This is the most popular site for wedding photographs in this particular area. All of these trees are actually infested with the beetle, and there will be a gradual decline, and all of these trees will eventually die, and they will have to be removed for public safety reasons. So this beetle will have not only an economic, but also a cultural impact. Next slide, please. If you find the emergence holes on the tree trunk, you have to remove a piece of the bark just to confirm that the fungus that causes staining. You can see that the dark staining in the centre of the photograph. And there's a mature oak tree on the left, in the left picture, that's been killed. And this is just one of hundreds that's been killed in South Africa. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, Botanic Gardens and arboreta have the expatria and impatria collections that can be used for early warning and early detection of plant pests. These can be used to enhance the biosecurity and assist plant protection services that have limited resources. But training and technical support are fundamental. What's also fundamental are good lines of communication, which was raised as an issue in all of the botanic gardens that we did sort of visit. The risks need to be identified, prioritised, and the research conducted before the pests arrive. And just on a final note, the overseas workshops were a great experience for the trainers as well as the trainees. Next slide, please. A lot of people were involved in sort of running these workshops. And as I said, I've met a lot of amazing, sort of inspiring, sort of passionate people who are really dedicated to sort of conservation and sort of biosecurity. So it was a great sort of experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So next up is Charles, and I'm just going to be sharing a video of his talk so that we can sort of avoid potential issues from internet connection. So let's get this started.
Hello, my name's Charles Lane and I'm a consultant plant pathologist of Fera Science Limited, and I work in York in the UK. I'm also a Royal Society of Biology senior plant health professional. In this talk, I'm going to talk to you about the R&D strategy that we've implemented for the International Plant Sentinel Network. In this slide, you can see a picture of a screenshot of the UK Plant Health Risk Register. This is an excellent document which provides a lot of information about PRA for threats to the UK. There are now over 1,200 entries, and each organism gets a value for unmitigated and mitigated risk. And there's a variety of different mitigations, as you can see on the right-hand side. This might be regulation, surveillance, an industry scheme, contingency plan, and where we get involved particularly is in awareness and research. So the International Plant Sentinel Network can be used to gather information about some of the evidence gaps within the UK risk register. This may be about the distribution of pests and pathogens. This may be about the distribution of hosts. It may be about the impact of those different pests and pathogens on those hosts. So it provides an excellent opportunity for gathering data. The other thing that we'll also use for prioritisation about which pests and pathogens we'll work on is this list of priority pests as a result of the regulation 29/1702. And as you can see in there, there's some really high profile things in there like rose rosette virus, oak processionary moth, emerald ash borer. So a nice range of different pests and pathogens to work on. One of the things that I've done here is summarise the needs to balance the requirements of Botanic Gardens and arboreta with the National Plant Protection Organisation. So let's look at Botanic Gardens first. This is about enhancing and protecting collections, contribution to global conservation efforts, and attracting visitors. So some of the outcomes that they'll want from the project is improving their pest and disease management, improving their ability to be more timely and escalate their intervention into the National Plant Protection Organisation. Very importantly, of course, showcasing their scientific value, which also supports their funding, and also upskilling their education, whether it's their own staff or whether it's the visitors who come on the site. From the National Plant Protection's point of view, they want to make sure they're making informed decisions with respect to pest risk assessment. They want to be predicting future threats and sharing information, and they want to be raising awareness about plant biosecurity. So really the outcomes they're looking for are addressing PRA gaps, early warning, first detection, and engagement and interpretation. So there's a real skill here and a requirement for the International Plant Sentinel Network to balance the needs of Botanic Gardens and also balance the needs of the National Plant Protection Organisations. In the following slide, you can see how we go about trying to co-design the research and development. So we're very thoughtful of what the NPPO needs, which is about UK risk register evidence gaps, and also working on high-profile pests, where in Botanic Gardens it's about protecting the collection and building diagnostic capability and capacity. So the IPSN can work in two different ways. If we start on the left-hand side, we're looking at targeted surveillance. And this is where we first started working with the IPSN. This is surveying for the presence of known pests and pathogens. And we've worked on a variety of different pests and pathogens like Xylella. The spittlebug hunt was a great success. We've done surveillance work on rose rosette virus. Polyphagus shot hole borer is a key priority to ours, emerald ash borer, and non-fraxinous hosts of Hymenoscyphus fraxineus. So this is where we started working because actually it's easier to ask people to look for a specific pest or pathogen because the resources, the training material, and the requirement are much easier to ask than asking for general surveillance. More recently, we've been carrying out a pilot study and a feasibility study to see whether we can do more general pest and seed surveillance in botanic gardens and arboreta. We've just completed a 12-month pilot project working on Pinus, Quercus, and Rosa. But I think the important thing for both these types of work, it is about building capability and capacity in botanic gardens to build this work. And I think that's very important. We need to build a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, but also the International Plant Sentinel Network, as has been shown, produces a lot of resources. So, for example, the plant health checker is absolutely key to the work that we do, so we can encourage good surveillance and recording of information. And without that underlying infrastructure, neither the targeted or the general surveillance will occur. So I think this again is a nice example of how this co-design, and we've seen evolution of the project development. So the project started off as an R&D project led by the National Plant Protection Organisation, by plant health consultants and research staff within DEFRA, and it was funded under UFRESCO. And this was really about a concept development. Would International Plant Sentinel Network, would the Sentinel Network actually work as a way of gathering information? This led on to a second project, again funded by UFRESCO and DEFRA, and this was actually proof of concept. So we had already had the idea that a Sentinel Network could gather useful and valuable information for pest risk assessment, but could we build a network? And that's what we did in UFRESCO too. So this was actually led by ourselves at Fera, and we provide operational support to the National Plant Protection Organisation. We're now in the third phase of the project, which is stakeholder-led. And I think this is really important. We now actually, the project is led by BGCI. It has a lot of involvement from Botanic Gardens and Arboreta, as well as financial and scientific support from DEFRA and from ourselves. This is actually how the network is operating and functioning. So we've seen a nice evolution from R&D to operational to stakeholder-led. And I think that's what will ensure a very secure future for the International Plant Sentinel Network. And this is my final slide that shows the balance between the requirements of plant health scientists and citizen or stakeholder scientists. So for these projects, like the International Plant Sentinel to work, there needs to be reciprocal benefits to both parties. So although the NPPO may be putting up the financial money to run the project, which if it wasn't there wouldn't happen, there was a huge amount of in-kind contribution given by the Botanic Gardens and Arboreta. And without that support, these projects wouldn't run. Therefore, they need to be co-created. They need to benefit both sides of the party. If it's a one-side arrangement with one party actually giving a lot of time for free, if you don't have co-created, it's not going to run. And that's really about understanding each other's motivations and desired outcomes. So again, what are Botanic Gardens trying to achieve from this work? Why are they engaging and why are they getting involved? But also, why does the National Plant Protection Organisations want to work with Botanic Gardens? And I think the one thing we've also learned from any of these citizen science or any of these stakeholders, it needs to be a long-term investment. To ask untrained volunteers, whether they're citizen scientists or whether they're stakeholders, to start surveying for the pests and pathogens is a difficult task. We might all take it for granted in plant health science, but actually it is a difficult task. It takes a lot of knowledge, it takes a lot of skill, it also takes a lot of time. So therefore it needs to be there for that long-term investment. And I think as you've seen with the International Plant Sentinel Network, we've seen that evolution of the project from research to operational to a network actually being run by BGCI. And I think that's where the success of this project will be, and for many years to come in the future. So thank you very much for your time, and feel free to email me if you have any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So we are actually nearly out of time, but I think we do have an opportunity to ask at least one question. So let's have a look. Actually, one question I was going to ask is one of the things that I really like about the IPSN is how enthusiastic the Botanical Gardens are about joining in. But I imagine, as Charles was saying, there's quite a lot of, it might seem a bit intimidating, you know, doing the surveys and things like that. But if people are sort of interested in joining the IPSN, perhaps you could give them a bit more of an idea of how they join and also sort of the commitment that's sort of expected from them.
That any Botanic Garden that's interested can become a member of the IPSN, and actually any plant health professional that wants to give their expertise is greatly appreciated as well. So we have sort of a formal membership process, so gardens actually get in touch with me and become a contact person for their garden, and we have a kind of formal agreement really with them. So basically just that, you know, if they do find something which is new to the country, that they have an obligation to report that to their NPPO, and then through that they become an official member and have access to the members area of the website, say, and are our key contact for it. But as I said, we also have sort of non-formal members that just get involved in specific surveys that they're interested in, say for something like rose rosette virus. If they have rose collections in their gardens, they may be just really interested in monitoring those rather than becoming formal partners.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got a question here. So what is, or what do you think is the sort of most iconic pest that IPSN has identified as sort of a newly emerging pest-host relationship, perhaps before it was reported elsewhere?
Apologies, I'm disappointed it's not a pathogen, it must be the polyphagous shot-hole borer. I do think it has the wow factor, and very interesting. I'm also involved in a citizen science project in the UK called Observatory, and we've just highlighted that the polyphagous shot-hole borer could actually be a potential target for surveillance by citizen science. So many thanks to Chris and the IPSN for really bringing that to international attention, I think. So for me, sadly, as a pathologist, I have to admit it's a pest. Perhaps Chris might have another opinion on pests and pathogens.
Can I say that when we first started this sort of project, and I first went to California, the prolific shot-hole borer was killing the whole range of plants, but it wasn't known as a pest really of English oak at that point. Partly because there weren't many English oaks in the vicinity where the insect occurred, but then going to South Africa where they have large areas of English oak, it's naturalised, and it's quite amazing. It's one thing to read about a pest killing a tree in a text or hearing about it, but when you see it in the field, when you see a magnificent English iconic English oak dying because of this little tiny beetle that's no more than 2 millimeters. And I should say, it's not the beetle that actually kills the tree, it's the fungus. It's the fungus that blocks all of the vessels within the trunk. So it's the fungus that's the enemy. The beetle just happens to be sort of carrying it.
There you go, you can take some comfort from that, Charles.
I think so. The other thing I was also going to comment, I think the other good thing about the IPSN and Botanic Gardens is just they're quite light of foot. So they're quite responsive. So when we thought about the spittlebug hunt, that was something that was pulled together really quickly by IPSN, delivered into Botanic Gardens, and we got some really quick, rapid results at a time when there was a big evidence gap. And that's now been taken on at a much bigger scale on a much larger project. But that light of foot is some of the things I think that BGCI is very capable at.
Okay, and I think we'll just squeeze one more question in. So this is perhaps for Katherine, but Charles and Chris may have some opinions as well. Are you considering sort of climate suitability as a factor? So when trees are planted outside of their normal range, they might be stressed, so they might be sort of more susceptible to pests and diseases, for example?
The general surveillance, moving that forward, potentially sort of climate matching is something that we would be interested in doing. So looking at climates which match the UK, but also there's this new tool that I need to actually learn more about, which is actually looking at tree species and their resilience to climate change. So a specific species, you'll be able to tell the effect that climate change is going to have on it. So to determine whether the effect that stress will have on that. So I think bringing that sort of information into the on the tree species that could be really useful as well.
Okay, so I think we're pushing towards the end of time there, so we'll finish up. I just want to thank all of the speakers today. And for those of you who are watching this, I hope you have a great rest of the day or evening, depending on where you are watching. And please be on the lookout for an announcement about our next webinar in April. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.